Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Miriam Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to get started? Then let's get going. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Welcome to episode 26 of the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Today we head north to Chicago to get to know Thomas MacEntee. Thomas, welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here today. Let's get started by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Well, I started my business about 5 years ago. My main website is High Definition Genealogy at HIDEFGEN.com, and I sort of laugh because I have so many different ventures that it's really hard to peg me. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But what I'm known most for is the GeneaBloggers.com website, where I've organized a community of over 3,000 genealogy and family history bloggers. That is a free website, and it does work into my business because it really has given me, some would say, the notoriety, but the exposure in the genealogy field, which brings me speaking engagements. That's where I make much of my income, and publishing right now.
Now, you actually came to genealogy from a slightly different path. You were working in a completely different field, and then you made the choice to completely go into a different industry. Can you tell us about that time in your life? What were you doing, and why did you make the decision to make such a radical change?
Yeah, well, I've always been the kind of guy that can adapt pretty easily and sort of pivot and move on to something new when especially when your back is up against the wall. In 2008, up until that point, I had spent 25 years in the legal field working for large corporate law firms. We're talking law firms with 2,000 or more attorneys around the world, 17, 20 offices, different languages. And I was in the information technology field. I started out as a document processor doing word processing at night. I did paralegal work. I also wound up teaching Microsoft Office applications to attorneys and secretaries. That meant Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Then I migrated over more towards server work, and my last job was handling project management for major information technology projects, like moving an office from one building to another in a 72-hour time span with 500 employees. And you can imagine that took a year and 10,000 different tasks. These were back in the days before cloud computing, when we actually had server rooms and had to move servers. In 2008, in the fall, I was actually laid off because my firm went bankrupt. They left me in the lurch. They owed me $40,000 in vacation pay and back wages, and I had to scramble to make money. And I sat and I thought, I don't want to be doing what I've been doing for the past 25 years. I had gotten more and more interested in genealogy, and I knew I was looking at the genealogy industry, and I knew things were starting to change. Social media was becoming more popular. I knew that television was about to pick up the shows like Who Do You Think You Are? So I thought, this is something to combine a hobby that I love and make a living out of it. So I took a lot of the skills that I've developed in 25, 30 years and moved them over to the genealogy field.
Now, one of the things that makes you different from other genealogists, and it's the transition. Most genealogists go through the same process as you. Maybe they didn't get laid off, but most genealogists switch from a career to the genealogy profession. But the thing about you is that you did it so rapidly. You switched to this industry and you set your mind to tasks and you just set out to fully embrace. Can you talk about how you decided that you were going to engage like that, and what was it that spurred you on to integrate with the community quite so quickly?
I think the project manager side in me, I mean, I use a project management tool. I use an Excel spreadsheet every day when I get up in the morning, and I plan out what I'm going to do for the day. So that's what I did. I planned out, where do I want to be in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years. And I knew I had to be flexible. So one of the first things I did, and this touches on the education, I signed up for ProGen, the ProGen study group, because I wanted to learn, 20 years of doing genealogy, but still doing it as a hobbyist is different than doing it as a professional. And then I also took the Boston University Certificate in Genealogical Research course online in the spring of 2010. I had set my sights on that. I saved money. I set money aside to do that, and that was a plan, and I completed that. And so it's a matter of just mapping out. I also looked at people that I felt were doing it right, not just in genealogy, in other fields as well. And the one thing is I saw that social media was key. This is where Megan Smolniak introduced me and a few other genealogists to Facebook when we were working with the Unclaimed Persons group. And I could see the power of not just Facebook for that group, but also genealogy in general. I think a lot of people scoffed at it. They thought it was a passing fancy or a fad. But I stuck with it, and I also did my homework. One thing we know, Marion, is that genealogists are great researchers. We do our homework, we go out, and we're resourceful, and that is basically what I brought to my business. I said, okay, I need to learn more about social media. Where am I going to learn more? Who are the people that are doing it right? Etc. And so that's really, I don't think that my rise has been that quick. If looking at it from my perspective, it's been a lot of work, a lot of 15-hour days working at home. But I think in the time span, yeah, it does seem that way from the outside, I guess.
Well, I remember when you were new, at least new to me, and I'm a genealogical speaker, as you are, and you were flying all around the country going to all these talks where you were not being paid for your travel. And I asked you at that time, how on earth do you do that? And you said, I just eat the cost in order to get yourself out there.
Right.
So
I did that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Why did you decide? So what you did was you decided to invest in yourself. Why did you decide to invest in yourself like that?
Well, what I did is I had set aside 401k retirement money, and my view on retirement has changed since coming out of the corporate world. I think for many Americans in the post-Great Recession era, it has as well. I don't think that I'll ever retire. I also don't think that I'll ever see all of my Social Security, so I know that I'm probably going to have to work. And there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoy what I do. I love what I do. So I took what would have been retirement money and I plowed it into my business in terms of paying for travel and things like that. Worked first with Family History Expos. Holly Hansen has run a great series of expos all around the U.S., and I knew that she didn't pay her speakers and she didn't pay travel, but what it did is it got me exposure. At the Mesa Family History Expo, there were 800 attendees, and that's what it was. I wanted exposure. I wanted to be up there on the stage. I wanted to share my knowledge. I wanted to be able to hand out business cards. Made sure I had my email and my website on the top of every handout for every talk that I did, and that was key. It's almost like being a singer, a country music singer breaking into the business, or any singer, or even comedian. You do a lot of bus tours, where you're doing 20 or 30 city tours. On average, now I would say I fly about 50,000 miles a year around the world, speaking about genealogy. And that is an investment too, Miriam, because not only do I get paid to speak, but I have other people come up to me afterwards and say, hey, we'd like you to speak for our society, or we need you to help us produce a book. So it leads into, it's an opportunity. Every time I speak out of town, I see that as an opportunity.
So I think you're saying that you feel like that strategy that you started was successful, and it gets you where you wanted to be.
It did. It got me at a point where people knew who I was, or the right people knew who I was, and then it sort of snowballed from there.
All right, let's talk a little bit about services, because you are a genealogy professional. You work within the field of genealogy, but you do some things that are very different from other genealogists. You are a speaker, and I know you write because I've seen loads of articles by you, but you don't do client research, do you?
Right. Again, it's all about morphing and realizing what you do best, what you like to do, and being able to transition and being flexible. I started out doing client research, and it wasn't satisfying for me. It did help on the education end. I had to learn new record sets and things like that, but I knew that's not where I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. Mostly, I do speaking. I also do publishing. I have a series of ebooks. I've had magazine articles for websites, etc. The one thing that I do that I don't think many others do is I keep on top of the genealogy industry from a market standpoint in terms of why is it popular, who are the players, who are the consumers, what are the demographic, how are things changing, etc. And so, I will take Ancestry's securities and exchange filings, and I will just read them from front to back. I know it sounds very exciting, but the thing is I will look for clues as to, okay, where is Ancestry going? Are they having growth problems? What are their pressure points, etc. And so I do that. And then what I do is I turn around and I sell that knowledge. I do quite a bit of consulting work. I work with genealogy startup companies. Some of my clients have been FlipPal Mobile Scanner, Saving Memories Forever, Real Genie, and a few others, and Wikitree.com. What I do is I help them in terms of social media, how to engage a genealogy community, how to get noticed. And it's more of an incubation. Very often I'll be hired for anywhere up to a year, and then they're set out on their own. So that puts pressure on me from a business standpoint, is I always need to bring in a new consulting gig to incubate, because I know the other ones those eggs are starting to hatch. So I do that. The other thing I have found success, Marion, is self-publishing, not just my own work, but I edit quite a bit of other work where I take an editor's royalty. I don't get paid up front. I am an entrepreneur. I would like to take a risk, and I will take an editor's royalty on your ebook, hoping it will sell 4,000 copies and not 4 copies. So there is, and that's something that's different about me, is that entrepreneurial angle, as I'll look at a project that most people wouldn't take, and I'll make my own propositions and say, hey, can we do it this way?
Getting back to the market research and the startups, how are those people finding you? Are they already within the community and they know about you, or are some of these startups outside of the community, they just have an idea that they think would apply to the genealogical community, and then somehow they find you and you help them?
Yeah, it's a combination. This is why it's important when I go to the conferences, I always work the vendor hall. I see who the new vendors are. I'm always keeping track of the vendors that are not there that should be there, because then I start to ask, well, why aren't they here? Have they moved on to something else, or do they find that these conferences are not a good fit for them? But when I see a new vendor, I make sure I introduce myself. I don't do the hard sell. I just very often I'll walk up to a new vendor and they already know who I am. They've heard from other vendors because they will ask, someone next to them in the booth, how did you do this, or how did you get started? How did you start your blog? And usually it will come back to me sometimes. And so that's usually how it is. It is word of mouth. I have to say that LinkedIn has worked phenomenally for me. You have to have a presence on LinkedIn. You have to have a robust profile. You have to get endorsements, put up all your publications, even magazine articles, and put them up there. I have been cold called by reporters for the New York Times and Wall Street Journal because they found me on LinkedIn. And so that's a lot of it. I go under the nickname Marion the Genealogy Ninja. As a genealogy ninja, it's hard to peg who I am and what I do, and that's on purpose. I want a little bit of a mystery. I want people to try and find me out on the internet and say, okay, who is this guy, Thomas MacEntee? I've heard about him. What exactly does he do? I don't like to be pigeonholed into being an educator, being an author. that's one of many different facets. And to me, that's all about that flexibility. I know I'm a quirky guy. I mean, I am quirky. I mean, I'm all about change. I love change. If I do the same thing every day, that drives me crazy. And I don't embrace change just for the fact that, I embrace change. It's just that it's just the way I work. It's the way my mind works. It's that creative edge that I have.
What was the hardest part of starting your genealogy business?
Oh, the hardest part was getting into a routine. I mean, I was lucky. I had worked at home. I'd worked at home for 5 years for my law firm before I lost my job. So that wasn't too bad, but it was sort of setting up a structure in a new industry and understanding where the money was, and also getting people to pay for certain services. There was a big concept that everything should be free. And again, in a way, did I feed that when I started out by going to speak for free? In a way, I did. But then after the first year, I said, I've been doing this. I built up my expertise. I have all these talks. I have all these articles. If you want me, you're going to have to pay X amount. And it wasn't a lot of money. But the thing is I think I've helped and a few other people have helped in terms of build up the value of what genealogy speakers and educators and authors do. And, that's been important. But to understand, I've had to say no. I've had to say no to certain opportunities because they just didn't pay enough. And that was hard. And sometimes money's very tight. It can go in cycles with me. And I think, okay, but do I want to discount myself? Do I want to be the Kmart of genealogy? And I have value. I put a lot of hours into a presentation, into an article. And if you want to pay $5 and have someone, outsource it to the Philippines and have someone over there do it, then God bless you. And you can get it done and that's effective, then God bless you and go ahead and do it. But I have a certain quality product. And I think, as business owners in the genealogy industry, we need to stick to that and we need to value ourselves. That was the hardest part.
Yeah, it's a really big issue within that. We could do a whole show just on that topic.
Yeah.
But we're not going to go there today. What skills did you lack when you started your business? You already talked about what you did education-wise, like ProGen and BU, but you have a very strong business background, but was there anything lacking, besides education?
I have to laugh because I didn't really have a business background. I have a liberal arts background. I had a degree in art history and Spanish literature, a bachelor's degree, and I had 2 masters that I started but never finished. One was in Renaissance art history. The other, believe it or not, was a master of divinity in a seminary. And so the thing is, I never pictured myself as a business guy. Also, the hardest part, Marion, was marketing. I know that you find that hard to believe.
Yeah, I find that really
exactly
really hard to believe.
Well, the thing is, I always thought that marketing was just peddling crap. To be honest, I mean, I just hated getting things in the mail. I hated telemarketing calls. I hated anything to do with marketing. But when you are starting your own business, and you realize that you're just starting out and you're not a known quantity, how are people going to find you? You've got to go ahead and make yourself noticed. And so I did. I did my homework and I studied, and social media, but regular marketing as well, business cards, flyers, email lists, all of it. And then what I did is, this is what's important, is I got so good at it that I'm able to sell this as a consulting gig. This is what I help societies and organizations and vendors with, is they want to know, okay, how do I get started on MailChimp? Then we just set up a few hours of consulting, or I set it up for them. So that's one of the things you have to think of in the genealogy industry. What do I do? What is it that I do that I do great and that I can share with other people? So, but that was the area, believe it or not. And again, I'm not pulling your leg here. It was one of those things in the corporate world. In a law firm with 2,000, 3,000 employees, I didn't have to sell myself. Basically, I was a service where, you needed help in Microsoft Word, you went and you saw Thomas. Or you needed help with a project, you went and you saw Thomas. And when you get up there and you speak, I had to work on my speaking skills as well. I did have some through corporate training and also through choir singing in church. 30 years of that served me very well. But I would say it was the marketing and also the back-end financial accounting side of business. How do I do taxes? How do I track my expenses? How do I track receipts? That was a challenge. But, it's do your research, do your homework. There are so many resources out there.
I'd like to touch on a couple points that you just mentioned. I want everyone in our audience to stop and listen to what Thomas just said. He said he didn't have a business background. He didn't know marketing. The point I want you to take is that he learned it. There are a lot of things that you say, oh, I can't do that, or I don't like to do that. Just like Thomas, if you put your mind to it, you can learn to do this. Now, Thomas never said whether he liked marketing or not, but he said that he learned it and he now uses it to his benefit.
There are certain things I didn't like. I hated Twitter. When I first started using Twitter, Marion, I thought it was the stupidest thing on the face of the earth. And I put it aside for 6 months. And then I did more and more homework. I use a great website called MakeUseOf, MakeUseof.com. I have a lot of free guides, like a guide to Twitter marketing, a guide to Pinterest marketing. HubSpot is really good for those types of guides as well. And I just said, darn it, this weekend I'm going to learn the ins and outs of Twitter, and at least I'll be educated to make an educated, informed decision as to whether it's going to work for me or not. And that's what you've got to do.
And the other point I want to make about what Thomas just said was when he was talking about having a negative connotation with marketing. The difference between a negative connotation and a positive connotation with marketing is passion. If you're passionate about something, if you believe in something, you will naturally market it. And it will be a good thing for you, and it'll be a good thing for everyone on the receiving end. So just keep that in mind. Most genealogists are very passionate, and it always ends up being a good thing when you're sharing that passion and that energy and that great feeling that you get from what you do. All right, Thomas, I want you to share if you don't mind, a specific story of an obstacle that you encountered early in your career and how you worked around it.
Well, I would say that it was with webinars, believe it or not, is I really didn't think that the concept, I wasn't too certain whether the concept would take off or not. And so I, again, go back to doing your homework. And I was thinking, okay, how can I make this pay for me? Would someone be willing to pay me to do a webinar? And again, I sketched it out. I'm a great mind mapper. I love mind mapping software. My favorite right now is Popplet, Popplet.com. And basically, I put my core problem in the center. And I do sort of a red light, green light, where on the right side are all the green boxes. These are the positives. These are things that are going to work. And on the red side, these are the negatives. These are the things that could go wrong, etc. And I, that was the hardest thing, was to get into the webinar market. It's not cheap to own your own platform. I then had to look for vendors that had their platform, like Legacy Family Tree. They've been great. Then I'm not a shy guy. I'm not a shrinking violet. You probably know that. Most people know that already. I will go ahead and I will ask for something. The worst they could say, Marion, is no. So are you willing to pay me as a webinar speaker? On the recordings, can I take a royalty? How are you going to know unless you ask? And there are two ways of asking. Ask your colleagues, ask your network. And I get asked all the time, and I don't mind if genealogy professionals email me and say, hey, how did you do this? Or were you able to do this? And I think you and I have even done this back and forth with each other. And the thing is that you've got to work that network and ask questions there, but also don't be afraid to just go out and ask questions. That's how I am now doing editor royalties. A few of the clients, a few of the vendors had never had editor royalties. The model was they pay X amount for editing, and that's it. It's a work for hire. So I would have to say that was my biggest challenge is looking at something in the genealogy industry that traditionally is not a moneymaker and looking at it from an entrepreneur standpoint and then just going with it.
How have your services changed? We've talked about, all the different kinds of services that you are offering, how has it changed over time? Because I imagine that when you first started, you had one thing in mind. And then one of the themes of this conversation is entrepreneurship and the ability not to be afraid to take risks, not to be afraid to hear the word no.
Right.
And I imagine that your career has changed greatly because you recognize the opportunity, you are willing to take risks. How did your mindset start when you first started, and how has it changed to where you are now in terms of, because you said you were doing client research and now you're doing all these other consulting services and stuff like that.
Right.
Just talk about that progression a little bit.
Yeah, the progression is not always easy. It comes back to saying no. When client research opportunities would come up, I would just politely say, no, my business is going in a different direction. But that's not where I left it. I would refer them to 2 or 3 colleagues that I knew were in that niche, that area of research. And that, Marion, is part of building your network. It's sort of that sharing and that give and take. And, I work from a success standpoint. And it's not just my success. I think when, Marion, you're successful, other people in the genealogy business are successful. We're all successful. I have this sort of what I call success jealousy. I've seen that a lot where people say, I should have gotten that gig or I should have gotten that opportunity. I don't look at it that way. I look at it, oh, great, Marion got this opportunity. Maybe down the road it'll be me or I'll have a similar opportunity. I share in that person's good luck and that opportunity. And I think that comes back to you. And so that's where I work from. And so when I say no, it's never a complete no. It's a no, but, have you ever thought about doing this, or have you ever thought about contacting this person? And so, yeah, right now I'm transitioning as well. You may or may not know that at Hack Genealogy, which is another one of my properties at hackgenealogy.com, I paired up with Lisa Also, who's a well-known genealogy educator and speaker and author, and we've been offering a boot camp series. Now, this was a risk because for the most part, most webinars have been free in the genealogy industry. So we're doing a paid model where it's 3.5 hours of education with more than the usual 4-page handout. It's collaborative. It's problem solving. And so we've been successful since November. We've sold out every boot camp. And the other thing, what I decided that, not many other people have done, is I bundled it up as a digital download afterwards. And so, yeah, you do take a risk. You have to put yourself out there. I've had ventures, believe it or not, that have failed, and they've failed miserably. But you do enough successful ones, that's what you're known for.
Yeah, you're a classic entrepreneur. And what makes you a little different is you're an entrepreneur in a field that doesn't have a lot of entrepreneurs, because genealogy predominantly has a lot of people who like the safety and comfort of client research.
Right.
And the thing is, we've had a lot of people on this podcast who've been very successful and support themselves full-time through client research. But not everybody knows how to get themselves there. And that's what this podcast is all about, is trying to take the experience from people like you who are entrepreneurs, or people like Melanie Holtz who are full-time researchers who support themselves, by doing this and sharing all the experiences that will help people get to really look at genealogy as a business.
Yeah, but even as a researcher, when I was a researcher, I always took a different angle. Here's an idea that I came up with that any researcher, if you're doing full-time researcher, can do. My ancestry is in a small town in Lewis County, New York, Lowville, that has a lot of bed and breakfasts that cater to the snowmobiling crowd. So what I did is I put together a guide, a local history guide, which basically had all of my information at the back. And you could do that for your local bed and breakfast. And yourself, you've done a house history, I believe, for a bed and breakfast. And you have to step outside the box of the traditional, marketing channels. And right now I'm focusing on this concept of hyper-local, going local. How can we go local as genealogists and work on local history and get people to notice us and our services and what we do?
Oh, I love that concept. Gosh, I could talk to you for hours on that topic. That's exactly that. I'm always thinking that way. One thing that I want to touch on before we move off to the lightning round is what you had said at the start of this discussion about seeking outside sources for information. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, because I think most genealogists focus on the community and news from within. How can we learn from and utilize the knowledge of people outside our industry?
Well, what we do is again, there are so many resources. Not all of it is online, but a lot of it. Starting online is a good point. Is a good starting point. For me, what I did is I knew that my niche was going to be technology, so I signed up for all the tech blogs. I must read literally about 500 blog posts a day between genealogy and technology, and I curate that information and I share it out there. So the other thing is, look at your local community college or business schools. Sign up for adult lifelong learning classes, how to run a business, etc. Social media. Look local. Don't always look online. We say that as genealogists, not everything is online, and it's not all online, all of it, but there are local opportunities depending on where you live. If you are in a rural setting, there aren't that many opportunities, so you would have to go online. But I went out and I said, okay, what is the best resource for social media? Who has the best guides? And again, you have to weigh and get recommendations from other people. I reached out to people in the marketing industry. I even reached out to one person in the plumbing industry, believe it or not, and because we had a discussion about the whole do-it-yourself aspect. And I was researching the whole do-it-yourself aspect of genealogy, which is at the core of Ancestry's business, and how does that impact us as genealogists who research for a living? And so I had read an article by this guy who was a consultant to the plumbing industry and had written entire articles about what do you do with a do-it-yourself person who's fixing their toilet on the weekend and they mess it up. How do you graciously bring them back into a professional way of doing that toilet repair? And so again, that's my quirkiness. That's the way I look at things, but I'm always looking outside. I don't, if it's plumbing and I can find an angle and get a genealogy angle on it, I'm going to bring it into what I'm doing.
Thomas, how do you balance your time between paid work and volunteering?
That has been difficult. I love volunteering. I actually just termed out of several positions. I'm no longer on the board of Federation of Genealogical Societies as of 2014, nor am I, volunteering with the Illinois State Genealogical Society. And to be honest, I do miss both of those groups dearly. I miss working with the people, miss volunteering and interacting. But it was 20 hours plus a week. And it was difficult. And again, it comes back to valuing yourself and saying no. If there was a desperate situation where FGS or ISGS needed something, would I be there? You bet I would be there, and I would help them right away. But to be sitting on a board, etc. So I would say that volunteering, I did a lot of volunteering again when I started out, because it got me recognized. And so I don't feel like I used those groups. I mean, we used each other. I mean, they used my expertise. They used my skills, and I used them in terms of building exposure. And so it was that give and take relationship. For now, I've had to take a break. So what I do is I tell people cycle on and off from volunteer work. It also helps these societies, Marian, because they have to understand that there's successorship in these positions. You can't have the webmaster or webmistress for 10 years, and then what happens if they get sick? You have no backup. You have no successorship. So I'm a big proponent of that. But I believe in volunteer work. I think it's vital to the genealogy community industry. But you've got to take care of yourself and take care of business as well.
Thomas, what's the most fun project you've ever worked on? And it can be anything from all the various things that you've done.
Oh, the most fun one was what I just got done with. I just got back from Australia. I've been home for about 3 weeks now. I was invited by Unlock the Past, which is run by Gould Genealogy down in Australia. They put on their fourth annual or their fourth cruise. It was a cruise of southern Australia and Tasmania, and that was out of Sydney. And so it was 9 nights. There were 250 other genealogists on board. There must have been about 20 speakers. There were at least 60 presentations. And then not only that, I was able to do a land tour. And so it was roughly 19 days I think that I traveled 35,000 miles. I can't tell you how many hours. I think I calculated 70 hours on airplanes. But it was great to meet the Australians. It was great to learn more about the Australian genealogy community. It was a bit of a risk for me because I was taken away from my business and my clients for 3 weeks, but I had enough advanced planning. And that lately has been the most fun project that I've been involved with. I love cruising for genealogy. It makes sense to me. When you're out on the water, instead of just, playing bingo or shuffleboard, I'd much rather be learning about genealogy. So that was the project.
Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
Hi, I'm Kathy Damaris, the Vice President of the Association of Professional Genealogists. The very first step I made towards my career as a genealogy professional was to join APG. At that time, the idea of researching for clients was just the spark of an idea in my mind. My APG membership brought me into contact with the best minds in the field and helped me learn about the array of educational opportunities available and the steps I needed to take to reach my goal. My first clients found me through the APG membership directory, and many of my clients still find me there. After a lot of education and hard work, I now have a full-time career as a professional genealogist. My membership in APG is one of my most valuable business assets. If you are thinking about a career in genealogy, I hope you'll join us too. Please visit us on the web at apgen.org, apgen.org.
All right, Thomas, we are about to enter the lightning round, and this is where I bombard you with a bunch of rapid questions, and you come back with brilliant answers that are going to knock the socks off the genealogical community, give them ideas, give them hope, give them inspiration. Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. What was one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
Running out of money.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
Be true to yourself. Be yourself. And people will like you for what you are and who you are.
What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
Check out the educational opportunities. I'm going to plug a great blog by Angie McGee, Adventures in Genealogy, Education. It's at genealogyeducation.blogspot.com. Learn what's out there. Do what I did. I got the degree at Boston University, not degree, certificate, and that's what I would recommend.
Do you have a productivity tool or an app that you love that you can share with the audience?
Actually, it's my project management spreadsheet. It's in Excel. It's available at Hack Genealogy. If you go to hackgenealogy.com, it's available for free. I have a video where I cover it, and you can get started tracking your own tasks and projects very easily with Excel.
Do you have a specific name for it so that if somebody went there...
It's just called Project Management. That's what it's called.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your preferred social media channel, which is not really a fair question to you since you so actively use so many of them, but which one is the one that you like the best?
Is Facebook. If
you can recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be?
Yes. It's called The Power of Unpopular by Erica Napolitano. It's available on Amazon as an ebook, and it talks about building community. And really, it was very inspiring.
And it's called The Power of
Unpopular. Yes.
Interesting. I think I'm going to have to go out and buy that one. Okay, here's a new question that we're going to be adding to the Genealogy Professional podcast, and it's called Tips from the Pros. So we're going to take an area that you happen to be expert in, and I would like you to pick 3 quick tips that you can share with our audience to help them move forward in this area. And for you, I'd like you to talk about social media. So could you give 3 quick tips to our audience? There are many genealogists who are not comfortable with social media. What are some things they can do to kind of help them ease into using it?
Number 1 is focus on your branding and be consistent in your branding. Pick a brand name. Mine is High Def Gen, HIDEFGEN. And if you look at all my social media properties, the Facebook page, I got the vanity URL High Def Gen. For Twitter, it's High Def Gen. Be consistent across the board. Use the same logo. Use the same artwork. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2, followers and friends and likes. Focus not on the quantity but the quality. You want good followers. You want followers that are going to share and evangelize your content and build that network. And then finally, number 3, do a lot of sharing. Do a lot of curating. Don't be an information hoarder. people, that was one thing, Mary and I got criticized early on, that I gave away too much for free or I shared too much. But the fact is, and I've said this before, I embrace the abundance model. I was raised by a single mother that told me that you can't constantly hold on to what you have. You have to let it go to have that palm up and open and in the air to receive the next good thing that's coming your way.
Give our audience one parting piece of advice and then tell us how we can get in contact with you.
Do a lot of reading and vary your reading list. Go out on Amazon or Kindle or Nook or whatever and look for some of those business books. They're the cheesy ones, that you see all the time. Go for some of the more unusual ones. Here's another one I want to throw out there. It's called Show Your Work by Austin Kleon, Kleon. He also did Steal Like an Artist. These two books have really been my touchstones as of late. But be a voracious reader. Intake a lot of information. I'm sort of like a humpback whale when I read. I mean, everything just comes in. I read anything and everything, and I process it, and I make notes. And a lot of it, I'll set up tasks on my project sheet saying, hey, check out this, check out that. That's really what I would say.
Thomas MacEntee, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional Podcast today.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you got as much out of that interview with Thomas MacEntee as I did. I get really excited listening to the ideas that he has because he has a way of looking at things differently with a fresh point of view. And I think that's a really good attitude and approach to take when you're an independent business person, when you're running your own business, to always be looking for something new and different, either to find new clients or maybe just to make your job a little easier. And by constantly learning about technology and other topics, that's one way of doing that. Thomas talked about all sorts of things. He talked about mind mapping and how he likes to use that in order to kind of thresh out his ideas. He talked about supporting and sharing in other people's successes. He talked about the risks he's taken, some of which have worked out, like Hack Genealogy, and others that haven't. He had a super idea about getting hyper-local with genealogy. That was a really fun idea he had about a bed and breakfast. And we talked a bit about using external resources, external to the genealogy community. Now, that's where I want to focus for our action item this week. I just think it's a really great idea, and I think more people should be doing that. So what I would like you to do is to think of something, an aspect of your work that you do where you could use some improvement or you could use some further knowledge, perhaps social media. That might be a good topic. Perhaps even practical things like accounting or time management. What I want you to do this week is to explore other websites, non-genealogical community websites. There are lots of social media websites where you can get information. Thomas had mentioned HubSpot.com and MakeUseOf.com. There's also Social Media Examiner. That's a great site for information about using social media. So what I would like you to do is pick that topic where you could benefit from using more information on that topic to kind of push yourself ahead or further your development, and go out and seek new sources from a different industry or from people who are experts and professionals in that item that you need more work on. So that's your task for this week. Before we go, I want to take a moment and give a couple shout outs for some reviews that were left on iTunes. The first comes from username Clytie Gold. That's Clytee. I hope I pronounced that right. And this person writes, "This podcast is not just for professional genealogists, though it is fantastic for that group. It is for genealogists and really anyone thinking about starting or running their own small business. I love listening to it. Maybe someday I could be a professional genealogist. Marian makes it sound possible. It is just a great podcast. Well done." Well, thank you very much. And I'm glad that you think that it's beneficial to other people outside genealogy. Really, most of what we're talking about in this podcast is tips that any small business person could use. So it's true. It really, our focus is on genealogy, so people might not want to listen to that aspect, but the point is well taken. So thank you for stopping by and leaving that review. One of the interesting things that I learned recently is that in the iTunes store, when you leave a review, there's a different section for every country. So when you are in the United States and you leave a review, it goes into iTunes US section. And if you live in Canada, it's in a completely different section in the iTunes Canada reviews. And if you're in the UK or Australia, it's in yet another section. And you actually have to physically click into these different areas of iTunes in order to see the reviews from different countries. So people who have international business podcasts, I don't know how they do it because you'd have to click into like 50 different countries to see all the reviews. But anyways, I learned this recently, and so I was clicking across and I discovered a review in Canada left by Janaean. And Janaean writes, Marian does such a wonderful job of interviewing a wide variety of genealogy professionals from around the world. A very engaging experience with many practical tips on how to start or improve your genealogy business. So thank you so much. And I'm sorry that review was left back in March, and I didn't know that it existed. Otherwise, I would have come checked it out sooner. But I just want you to know that I've seen it now, and I really, really appreciate you listening to the show from Canada and also stopping by to leave that review. And anybody in other parts of the world, if you want to leave a review, that'll be a fun little game of mine to now go check these other countries. But if you live in a country that I'm just not expecting, you might have to send me an email to let me know to check. That's the only thing. Until next week, so long.